Alright, peace and greetings, YouTubers. Breonna Taylor. Where do I even begin? The crazy aspect in all of this is that even as I look at the details and the information and the facts that have been presented based on what is known at the moment, it still paints the same picture, it still tells the same story, it still ties to police brutality, which resides in the house of systematic racism that was built on the street of structural oppression that sits in the neighborhood of white supremacy, which is something that saturates the globe and is the very foundation of the United States. Now, a lot of people don't like to have that conversation because it goes against the idea of American exceptionalism, and it goes against the idea of the status quo that people have built to believe when it comes to the ideal viewpoints of how people should see the country of America or the United States. But in all reality, it's still all the same foolery and the same foolishness. And the crazy bit about something like white supremacy is that it's so embedded that people are even conditioned to respond a certain way and play a certain role that has been assigned for them, depending on what kind of privilege they were born into or depending on what kind of disadvantages have been put forth for their collective. And so the crazy aspect that I saw with all of this, and we'll get to the details in a second, was that there were so many people I saw breaking their necks to try and say that it's Breonna Taylor's fault that she's not alive. People were saying, well, she should have changed the company she keep. Or why is she associating with these kind of people? That's what happened to her. And so people will negate everything else leading up to the shooting and somehow tie it to her being in her bed sleep as the reason why she was dead. It's just something she did. And it ties back to what I said about people playing their roles. Some people have been conditioned to the point where their viewpoints and their speaking points always work to protect something like the system of white supremacy, and sometimes they don't even realize that they're doing it, and sometimes they do, but it's literally reflex. It's just routine. It's the norm. It's the lens that has been created for some people to see through that they can't see through anything else, and so nothing else would ever make sense. For some people, it will never make sense that, hey, black people just might be innocent. It will never make sense that the police can be wrong. It will never make sense that some politicians have it all wrong. It will never make sense that America has a really crappy history when it comes to how the people of the world have been treated globally. You know what I mean? It's some of those things, it's just, you can't challenge any of it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And so the sad aspect is you also have people who buy into the idea of good guys and bad guys. And oftentimes, the good guys will always be the police. The bad guys will always be black people. Black men, black women, black children, anybody with any kind of proximity to any kind of blackness, absolutely bad. That's literally the perception that's put out there. And so a lot of times it's so hard for people to ever just look through a different lens. And so the crazy bit is, as I'm saying this, I know right now there's somebody like already typing in the comments and trying to contradict and say that I'm just doing the polar opposite of what I'm talking about. And so anyway, let's get to the actual facts. And again, this is such I hated having to read about this one, you know? And the crazy thing is that this is not just one random event. Like, this happens so frequently and so often, but we just don't really see it in the media. So to those who work on the blogs and those in social media and Twitter and YouTube and Instagram who work and fight to put awareness when it comes to these different stories, kudos to you, because in reality, a lot of us would have never heard of Breonna Taylor had it not been for Twitter making the story blow up. Had it not been for those on Instagram, had it not been for the blogs, had it not been for other YouTubers. And again, it just goes to show that, like, it's so frequent and it happens so often, but a lot of times nobody knows about it. But every now and then a story slips through the cracks and becomes a part of the national conversation. And that's why we're here talking about Breonna Taylor today. And so when you look at the facts based on what's been presented, the police were doing an investigation, and allegedly it had to do with some kind of drug business and everything like that. And they were looking for an individual that did not even live in the apartment that Breonna Taylor resided in. Long story short, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, Breonna Taylor unfortunately was killed during a police raid, gone bad. All right, stick with me. And so there's the investigation. They're looking for a certain individual who does not reside in the apartment that Breonna Taylor lives in, but they chose her apartment as the place to go and raid. One of the other facts to pay attention to is the fact that the person they were looking for was already in police custody. And so my question with that is, well, what happened with communication and a chain of command? Wasn't there somebody who was supposed to let somebody know, hey, this very person that you guys are looking for, I know you're about to do this really big raid with all these police and everything, and you guys all stayed up to 2 or 3 in the morning to do this, but the person that you guys are looking for, we already have. I don't know what happened with that or what the conversation of that is, but some said, well, you know what, even though they had the person, they still wanted to check the apartment because they believed that this apartment was a place where drugs were being funneled. And so they still go and they do this raid, right? And mind you, no drugs were found in this apartment, by the way. I just want to get to that because some people are already typing in the comments trying to argue me down. But there were no drugs found during this raid. But they go ahead and they do this raid. And now this is where you start getting 2 and 3 different stories. According to the police, which again for me is always hard to believe, because when it comes to a lot of these situations where the police are not shown in a good light, they have a history of lying. You can literally just go to YouTube and type police planting evidence on a suspect and you will find a rack of videos where police plant drugs and everything. Or you can just read the Assata Shakur book. That's a great example as well, as somebody being framed. But anyway, according to the police, their argument was they did the raid, they had the warrant, they announced themselves, which contradicts what would have happened on that warrant, because the warrant that they had is a warrant where you don't even have to announce yourself. It's a no-knock warrant where you can just kick the door in and go for it. And so the police are stating that they announced themselves, and that when they went in there, her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, just started shooting at everybody and was crazy, and they all feared for their lives, and they started shooting, and unfortunately she was collateral, and that's what it is. But then some of the things that come into question is the fact that, well, it doesn't help that there's no body cams, because in this specific police department, they're not required. And even if there were body cams, based on the history of what you've seen with a lot of police departments, they turn the cameras off anyway. And so I personally believe that even if there were video of what happened, the police would have still had the same story. Society would have still responded the same way. They would have said Breonna did something wrong for being in her bed asleep. They would have found a way. And so that's the police end of it. Kenneth Walker, who is now been charged with attempted murder, his response was, or his version of the story was that the police came in unannounced, kicked the door in, bust up in there. He thought somebody was breaking in. The police also, according to him, were not even in uniform. Okay, unmarked cars, all that kind of stuff. They come in there, they didn't announce themselves, they come in there, no uniforms. He's thinking somebody is breaking into the house. He pulls out his weapon and shoots, hits one officer, and then they start spraying everybody. There's 20 bullets that go out, and Breonna Taylor's hit 8 times. And the crazy part is, like, you would think that maybe after the first or the second or the third or the fourth, the fifth, sixth, maybe even the 7th bullet hit Breonna Taylor, somebody would have said, okay, actually, I think she's down. I think we got it. But no, it was like, no, let's go ahead and get that 8th one in there. Let's just lay it all out. And that's the crazy aspect, is that, people are going to look at all of this, and because Kenneth Walker pulled out his gun, which he had a permit to carry in his own home, and he felt that he was defending himself and his girlfriend, people will still find fault in that. And they will still say he should have never pulled the gun out on police. But my response to that is, if the police did not announce themselves based on Kenneth's testimony, then how are you to know that it's the police who are raiding your house? And we've seen so many stories where police who are off duty or not in uniform or in unmarked cars or whatever, they go and they end up in these situations where somebody gets killed and the person didn't even know that they were the police. And the police still get away with it, and then that person's still vilified, and they end up in jail if they're not already dead. And so with that, I also think people need to take into consideration what the environment is like when there's a police raid. If you've ever been or experienced a police raid, or heard somebody tell you that experience, it's very chaotic. Most people don't even realize what's happening, because it's literally the door gets kicked in, and the next thing you hear is like you hear 15 different people hollering and screaming. Everybody's giving different instructions. One officer saying get on the ground, another officer saying put your hands up, another officer saying freeze, another officer's asking you where this person's at, another officer saying bring out the dogs, another person's on the walkie-talkie, another person's cocking back the gun. You don't know what's going on, and as the person who's there, you don't know whether to put your hands up, because if you put your hands up, you're afraid that they may think that you're being standoffish, because maybe they told you to get on the ground. If you get on the ground, they think that you're reaching down for a weapon that you might be hiding under the bed or on the mattress or in your anklet or something like that if you have that on. If you just stand there and freeze because you don't know what to do, now they think that you're not complying. And so it's an environment of chaos. And that's why I'm always like, with the police, when they do these raids, like, man, can y'all nominate one officer to do the talking? Like, have one spokesperson. You can't have 15 people yelling at somebody. In addition to the fact that if you've ever been abruptly awakened out of your sleep, depending on how you sleep, some people take a minute for everything to kind of realign and make sense. Some people aren't irrational when they wake up, because it's just like, whoa, what's going on? Have you ever taken one of those naps where, I don't know, you came home from work and you laid down at 8:30 p.m. You thought you'd get a quick little 45-minute nap in, and then maybe get up and knock out a few things before you go to bed. But no, you crack your eyes and it's 3 a.m. and you just standing there. What's going on? Like, it take a few seconds. You don't even know what day. What am I doing here? Where am I going? That's some people's response. And everything like that. So it is totally understandable, and it totally would make sense that somebody like Kenneth Walker would think somebody's breaking into his house at 2 or 3 a.m, especially if it was unannounced. Because the police were saying, oh, they knocked on the door and everything, or that's what some people were saying the police were stating. I don't believe half of that. But again, it just makes no sense that, this woman is gone. And then the part that gets me is that it reminds me so much of Aiyana Jones, who I just talked about in the Ahmaud Arbery video as well. And remember, Aiyana Jones, she was the young girl that was killed in her bed. The police were doing a raid, similar story. They were shooting for the TV show First 48. She ended up being collateral and getting killed. And I think the question becomes, what is the actual standard policy with police when it comes to these raids? Are y'all shooting to kill, or are you shooting to disable? I'm convinced that it's shoot to kill, and that's all it is to it. No ifs, ands, or buts. But the unfair element of that kind of approach is that anybody who else is in the room, or anybody who's in the room, even if they're not the person that the police are looking for, has the risk of being collateral. And I'm like, is that really how you would want to police the country? Or is that really how you expect to keep safety? And then you wonder why black people don't trust police, when literally all y'all want to do is come in here and spray everybody over everything. And some people, again, are latching onto the fact that Kenneth Walker had a gun and blah, 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 blah. But if the tables were turned and this was a white man and some black police officers, he would have been a hero. He would be the vigilante, because, of course, in the United States, when it comes to white men and guns, they're celebrated. When they have the guns and the weapons, they're the symbol of American freedom. Second Amendment, NRA carrying, remember, everything is so great, this, that, and the third. And that energy is never the same when it comes to black people, because black people are not allowed to have weapons in the eyes of America. When you talk about Second Amendment protections and everything, that is not for black people. That's for white folks. Prime example, like you look at somebody like Tamir Rice, who unfortunately was killed when he was outside playing with a BB gun. Somebody called the police. The police show up. Not even 2 seconds after parking and barely even getting out the commands, they had already shot this kid dead. And apparently they thought he was a grown adult pointing a gun at them. But then on the flip side, you can see pictures of white people, specifically white men, going into Subway with a whole bazooka. I'm still stuck on what the purpose of that was. What in the Grand Theft Auto is this? Have y'all seen that picture? I'm gonna post it. I mean, it was one guy and it was a bunch of them. They had all kind of heavy machinery, all kind of guns that you normally don't even see. I'm like, a bazooka for Subway? Like, bruh, we just trying to eat, man. What, you gonna blow the place up if they don't have any olives? You just blow it all out if they don't toast your sandwich? Like, what you doing? But again, that image is celebrated. That image is, oh, they're fighting against tyranny. They're fighting against the government that's trying to take away all their rights and blah, 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 blah. But that same energy is not meant for a 12-year-old that was playing with a BB gun. Now, there are conversations about black youth having any kind of toys that look like any kind of weapons, because we know the system is not fair. And for some folks, it's like, why even have your child with that toy? But at the end of the day, that conversation should have been a conversation that took place without the death of a 12-year-old. You know what I mean? Like, that 12-year-old should have not been killed, especially when the fact exists that the police didn't even give the kid a chance to respond or do what was told. They just took him right out. He wasn't even looking in a direction when they pulled up. That's the crazy aspect. But again, it reminds me of Aiyana Jones. It reminds me of Fred Hampton, who was also killed in his bed in front of his entire family. And so you just see this whole reckless energy when it comes to just how they go and they carry out these different things. And I just think, and again, even going back to Ahmaud Arbery, because I saw this comment a lot in the video. I don't normally, sometimes when I make videos, I don't respond to comments for my own peace of mind, just because I'm not about to sit here and go back and forth with some people. But one of the things that I kept hearing people say, because of course they want to paint him to be this vilified criminal that broke into some houses and was dangerous. And okay, he broke in the house, and then the video came out and they couldn't wait to post that video. And I'm like, okay, so the video shows this guy walking around a house that's under construction. Depending on the kind of neighborhood you live in, and as somebody who's grown up in an environment where I had parents that had 2 or 3 houses built from the ground up, and sometimes we were the first house completed in the neighborhood, it was very common for people to just walk from house to house and look at the floor plans of the homes that were still under construction. Oh, they're going to put their bathroom here. Okay, well, in our house, it's right here, but that's clever. Okay, maybe we should have got this house instead. Oh, I like that floor plan. It's very common. Secondly, the crazy aspect is when you look at the father and son who went and killed Ahmaud Arbery, they didn't even live in the neighborhood. They lived 11 miles away. Like, y'all done made me hiccup, stressing me out so much. 11 miles away. They're not even in close proximity to where any of that is, which is like, so literally, y'all literally are just out there riding looking for something to start. Secondly, or thirdly, even with that, the owner of the house that was under construction was like, no, I didn't call the police about anybody breaking in. I didn't know about any break-ins until, at least for the last 2 or 3 months. The last thing I heard about was some guns going missing from a car back in January. I don't think he stole anything. I looked at the video. He didn't steal anything. I did not call the other 2 to come over here and check things out, even though I don't know how all this ties together. But the point that I'm making is like, Society has already vilified that individual. And the worst part of the conversation is when you talk about the whole shotgun. Everybody was breaking their necks to say, oh, well, he grabbed their shotgun. And I'm like, can we be realistic? Let's talk about fight, flight, or freeze, okay? You know, when anybody ever ends up in a situation where there's danger, you're going to respond 3 different ways. You're either going to freeze up because you just can't even fathom and calibrate in your mind what's supposed to happen next because you were so caught off guard, or you're going to fight. You're going to fight to save yourself, or you're going to run or flight. But pretty much, let's be realistic. If somebody has a shotgun who has pretty much followed you onto some road and everything and confronted you, if they pull out a shotgun, even if you run in zigzags, the reality is you're most likely going to be shot. And if you get shot with a shotgun, there's no coming back from that. You're going to be a 2 a.m. infomercial, and it's text 649 to help Darnell be able to walk again. You know what I mean? So a lot of people in that situation, for them, their only option would be, let me grab the gun and get a hold of the situation. I don't plan on killing anybody, but at least if I have the gun in my hands, I can get them to leave me alone until the police come. That's how a lot of people would respond. So I think it's stupid that so many people kept saying, oh, but he reached and grabbed for the gun. And it ties back to what I said when I say that people always play a role, or there's a role that's assigned to people when it comes to white supremacy. Because in the minds of a lot of people, somebody like an Ahmaud Arbery, they picture this whole violent being that's just so violent, and oh, he lashed for the gun and he was trying to kill me and blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like what you saw with Mike Brown when Mike Brown was killed. And then Darren Wilson, a police officer, when he was giving his affidavit about what happened, he was, you know, he just got shot and he just kept walking towards me and I kept shooting, but he just kept coming. You know, it's so easy for people to kind of buy into this concept that black men are these beastly aggressive individuals who, you know, it takes so much power to take them down, because once that angry black violent creature thing snaps on, you can't turn it off and everybody's in danger. So somehow 2 random white men who pull up on somebody with a shotgun, somehow they're the ones claiming self-defense after pulling up on somebody, harassing them. That person fought for their own life and that person is dead, but they're the victims. Somebody make it make sense. I can't. And another thing I do want to address, I'm just going to talk about a few things, but this is still centered around Breonna Taylor. But again, because the other conversation I'm seeing, and when we talk about, again, roles being assigned to people based on how they're conditioned to see the world, you've seen a lot of people bring up the conversation of, well, what about black on black crime? I'm like, here we go again. All right, fool, you want to have that conversation? Let's have it. The first thing we would need to address is, one, let's talk numbers. Because in all reality, when people think of black on black crime, which is a phrase I don't like to use because crime exists in all communities, but people have kind of created this whimsical perception of black on black crime where black people are just killing each other because they're black. And as soon as you go in a black neighborhood, it's just spray everybody and take everybody out. You know, the ice cream truck pulls up in Baltimore, and because they didn't have the right popsicle, everybody died. That's kind of the verbiage that gets put out there. But let's talk numbers, because when people think of these crimes, they're often thinking of murder. So when you talk about murder, most murders are what you would call proximity killings. Proximity in the realm of somebody has some kind of relationship with another person, whether they're in a relationship, whether they live together, whether they work together, whether they frequent the same business, or whether they're a customer at a business. There's some kind of connection. Maybe we go to the same barbershop. Maybe you're my barber. Maybe we use the same grocery store, or we have mutual friends. Most people always, there's some kind of relationship that exists. And so most people are killed by somebody that they know. Secondly, when you talk the numbers, white people kill each other at a rate of about 86 to 87%, meaning white on white crime. White people are killing each other at a rate of 86 to 87%. Secondly, when you talk about the rate of black people killing each other, as far as black people killing black people, it's at a rate of about 92 to 93%. Those could almost mirror each other, but the flaw that comes into that research is the fact that black people are convicted at higher rates for the same crimes. So we don't even know the real numbers of what it looks like on the realm of what's happening with white people. But even then again, if you're talking 86% and 92%, the difference between the two demographics is one demographic sits under the structural oppression that exists within America. Another group does not. So you have a group that's privileged, but they're still killing each other at a rate of 86%. That's the first part. Secondly, one of the things that I never hear, when there's a mass shooting and white people collectively go and shoot up a movie theater, or shoot up a church, or shoot up a school, or shoot up a mosque, or shoot up the mall, or shoot up whatever it is that they shoot up, depending on what they feel like shooting that day, you don't hear white people break their necks and say, oh, well, what about the white on white crime? Why are we pissed off about this? Nobody ever has that conversation. It's just the standard, it's the norm, it's accepted. However, people for some reason feel some kind of way that black people are outraged that people are killed by police or killed by somebody racist. And I think that's a second conversation, which I'm gonna get to in a second. But again, Well, actually, I'll get to it now. Again, when a police officer, specifically a white police officer or even a black police officer, kills a black unarmed individual, or if somebody racist kills a black individual, that's a conversation about power structure. When black people kill each other within their community, that's a conversation about a struggle for resources and the outcomes of that larger power system that exists. Again, when we talk about people playing into the roles that have been conditioned for them to play in, that's the prime example. But getting back to some more numbers, because I don't just want to give y'all a bunch of hot air, then, let me pull up what I was reading the other day. Had this already. Let's talk about some more of this white violence that does not exist in the world of many people. So when we talk about white violent criminals disproportionately attacking white victims, among white victims, a higher percentage of victimizations were committed by white offenders, 57%, than offenders of any other race. White victims perceive the offender to be black in 15% of violent crimes and Hispanic in 11%. But then and again, that's just people who know each other. But then when we get into the realm of strangers, white offenders are the group most likely to assault black strangers. The percentage of violence committed against a black victim by a white offender who was a stranger is at 50%. All right? Higher than the percentage committed by a black offender who was a stranger, 38%. Remember those numbers. Now, we talked about proximity killing. When there's some kind of relationship where somebody knows somebody, this, that, and the third, that percentage is that percentage is 92, 93%. When it's somebody who doesn't know anybody, which a lot of times this is the verbiage that's put around the whole idea of black on black crime. Black folks just killing people just mercilessly in the streets. They don't even care. All right, 38%. In comparison to white folks where it was literally, 50? And then let's get even deeper, because then when you talk about violence within white communities, if you're taking a sample size of 1,000 people, out of that 1,000 people, 56.4 people, speaking as far as crime when it comes to white on white violence, it's at a rate of 56.4. White on white violence out of a sample size of 1,000 is 56.4. That same number of 1,000 with a black population is 51.3. Now, those are based on conversations of poverty, which is the other aspect. When you get into the conversation of resources and wealth, you see discrepancies when it comes to the numbers. In communities that have a little bit more than the other, crime rates go down. That means there's opportunities, there's jobs, there's resources. People don't feel like they're at rock bottom. People are not desperate and destitute. And so it's a totally different environment. So when you talk about that 56.4% of white people killing each other in that sample size of 1,000, that's in the poorest white communities. And when you go to the poorest black communities, and I'm not saying that that's the only place where crime happens, but using that same sample size again, the percentage is 51.3. So it's actually lower. And again, that poorest black community is a poor black community that was created because of redlining. White people did not have that same experience. So it's interesting to me that so much energy is aimed at black people for responding to the conditions that have been created for them, but white people who have had every opportunity in the world get a slap on the wrist for doing the same thing at a higher rate. And somehow the narrative has been flipped, and now all of a sudden it's black people are out of control and black people are violent. I think y'all need to start reading and paying attention to numbers, because that crap be pissing me off for real. Like, y'all have just created this whole mindset where you go into black neighborhoods and it's just wild and crazy. And don't get me wrong, there's violence in all communities. It is an issue that needs to be taken care of, but we can be offended about more than one thing. We definitely can. And I think it's a cop-out whenever somebody, and this includes some black people, whenever somebody breaks their neck to come and bring up the black-on-black crime conversation in response to a national tragedy that has garnered some kind of national attention in regards to an unarmed black person being unjustifiably killed by a larger power. You got to be out of your mind and open your mouth to say some foolishness about black on black crime. But I ain't finished yet, because then even with that, my thing is you're not paying attention. What are you really paying attention to? Because in every major metropolitan city, in every major city where there's a black sample size population, where there's enough people that can fill up a room, there has always been a bunch of grassroots organizations aimed at working to make the community better, trying to bring people together. It's always been that way. So many grassroots organizations. The problem is you're not paying attention to those organizations because they're not on your radar. It's not something that really bothers or concerns you. The only time you're going to get concerned or even pay attention to what's happening in a black community is when black people get pissed off about somebody white killing them or them being killed by a police officer. And then boom, people come into those roles that have been created for them again. And when you go and break your neck to say, well, what about black on black crime, blah, 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 you're playing into the role that was conditioned for you to be in. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to do as far as how white supremacy works. You're supposed to play that role and what it is you're indirectly protecting that system that exists and trying to deny that it is as bad as it really is. And again, when you're talking about violence in black communities, that's the outcome. That's the outcome of a system that's been built and embedded and not invested in for decades and decades and decades, where pretty much you literally work to build a crime state based on the fact that the schools suck. There's no money going to the schools. Everything is criminalized. The housing is trash. Everything. People have just been put into a system that is not fair and vilified. And now you're mad at them for responding the way that anybody would if they were put in those same conditions. But again, when you flip the script and you go into these poor white neighborhoods where there were not ordinances that stopped them from living in neighborhoods. There were not ordinances that stopped them from going to certain schools. It's just they got a bad deck of cards, because unfortunately, that's the way that capitalism works. It doesn't protect everybody. So even white people become collateral to something like capitalism. But for black people, they got to deal with racism and capitalism together. And it's like a 2-for-1 double-edged sword special that really lays them out. But again, you will vilify that demographic and say nothing to the other. And I'm just like, really? But going back to what I was saying, there's a bunch of organizations that work and aim to fight and combat that. You always see all kind of marches against violence, and mothers are going to do this, and fathers this, that, and the third. You had things like the Million Man March. There's always been that kind of stuff. There's always been organizations. There's always been after school programs. There's people who run community centers aimed at keeping the kids off the street, aimed at working with kids ages 5 to until they grown, literally, where, okay, let's inspire you and let's make sure you go off to college and let's have you be great. And, here's a safe place for you to go so you can stay off the street, so you can do something and amount to something that would make you and your family proud. All of that exists, but those people get ignored. You know what I mean? And even if we talk on a smaller scale, because everything doesn't always have to be structural, everything doesn't always have to be an organization, even the people who represent themselves as the pillars of a community. You know what I mean? These are especially in communities that have not really been mobile, where it's literally the same residents that have been there for decades and decades. Not a lot of people are moving in, not a lot of people are moving out. And in these neighborhoods, you always see those people who are what you call like the pillar of the community, the older black woman who everybody loves. And you've seen the story with the black woman who was making the lunches for the kids all the time, just because that's just something she wanted to do. Or sometimes you see like the guy, I don't know, he might have been in jail some years ago, but he's a changed man. He wants to make sure that nobody else does the same thing. So when the teenagers are coming home from school ready to fight because somebody was talking trash in the cafeteria and now they got to stump each other out, he's the person that shows up ready to break up everything, and then the kids get annoyed like, oh, here he comes again. But because they have such a respect for that individual, they will adhere to what it is he's putting out there, and they will actually have an open ear because they respect his plight and his journey, and so they will listen to the knowledge that he's saying. Those kind of people exist all throughout many communities and everything like that. Like, perfect example would even be when I first moved to DC. I have an aunt out here that lives in a neighborhood that didn't always have the best reputation, but my aunt was beloved in that neighborhood. And so one time I was going to get Wendy's and she let me take her car. And before I could even get the car in gear, this dude was already pounded on the window because he thought I was still in the car. The way he was about to drag me out of that car and stump my head into that cement until I told him, no, this is my aunt's car. And he still didn't believe me. But then, my aunt kind of waved. She's like, oh, okay, you good, bro. My bad, dog. You good. Because literally that's how communities operate. But because people don't live in these communities, one, and two, people have this perception that's been created. A lot of it comes from media and TV and the sensationalization of everything. They just think that when you get into these neighborhoods, it's just a free-for-all and it's wild and crazy. If you want to address the fact that it's wild and crazy, then you need to address the fact that these neighborhoods don't have any investment, that there's no money coming into it. Because when you look at black neighborhoods that are affluent, the crime numbers are not the same. The statistics are lower. So it's definitely a conversation of resources. And so again, I need people to look at the full picture. If you want to bring up black on black crime, remember that's the end result of a larger origin. But see, people will always go and attack the end result and never address the origin. And the issue is the origin, again, protects that whole entity of what you call white supremacy. So people, like I said, have just been conditioned to operate and see the world through a certain lens. So there's my 2 cents. That's all I got on it. Rest in peace, Breonna Taylor. I'm sorry that it had to happen to you. And I'm sorry your family has to deal with everything. And I'm sorry that you're going to have to see, or your family members have to see, so many naysayers really try to just smear your image. It's just absolutely crazy. It makes no sense. That's all I got. I'm going to bed, man. I can't. Like, literally reading the people who were saying, oh, well, she should have did this, she should have did that. I'm like, it's like, what? You're on such a different wavelength. I don't even understand. Anyway, share your 2 cents. I'm out. Subscribe.